We've just witnessed the now familiar sight of a Prime Minister saying farewell at their final PMQs. Soon, we'll see the equally familiar sight of a new one being clapped through the door of number 10. But this handover is different. Andy Burnham has been an MP again for less than a month. He returned to Parliament in June, winning the Makerfield by-election with nearly 25,000 votes and a majority of more than 9,200. On the highest by-election turnout in almost 7 years. A decisive win, but it's a mandate from one corner of Greater Manchester, not from the country. He didn't stand on the Labour manifesto that delivered Sir Keir Starmer's majority in 2024, though he says he'll honour its pledges. And he hasn't faced a leadership contest, having won the backing of the overwhelming majority of Labour MPs. Now, he wouldn't be the first to reach number 10 without the members having their say. Gordon Brown, Theresa May, Rishi Sunak. Read into that list what you will. But all of them were senior figures in the government of the day. Burnham's last taste of government was over a decade and a half ago. And the former mayor of Greater Manchester has faced remarkably little scrutiny since. Not from the media, not from the public, not even really from his own MPs. So we simply don't know what a Burnham premiership looks like. Stylistically, he will be different, certainly. But on policy, continuity Starmer, Manchesterism scaled up to a nation, or something we haven't yet seen. Because the problems haven't changed hands with the keys. The NHS, the cost of living, the small boats, the fiscal arithmetic, all still waiting on the other side of that famous black door. One Labour MP told me this week he'd been sceptical about a Prime Minister Burnham, but has come round. His reason? This time he said it really will be all about delivery. Where have we heard that before? But Burnham's problem is this. Starmer arrived with a landslide and 5 years to play with. Burnham has neither. The party waved him through without a contest, but they won't be anywhere near as patient in judging him. And the public have already been promised delivery once. So his honeymoon will be short, weeks probably. He needs to hit the ground running, and by the autumn he needs something real to show for it, because a Prime Minister the country didn't choose can only earn the right to stay in one way, by delivering. This is The Times at 1 on Times Radio with me, Jo Coburn. So, as I said, we've just heard Keir Starmer's final PMQs. Let's talk about that and Keir Starmer's legacy with Tom Baldwin, Senior Political Advisor to Ed Miliband and author of Keir Starmer, the Biography. Welcome to The Times at 1. Tom, how do you think Keir Starmer will be feeling? It was touching at points, emotional, actually funny, the exchanges between Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch. But will he be feeling pride, regret, anger?
I think probably a combination of all of those. One of the frequent criticisms of Keir Starmer is that he doesn't really emote in public. He conceals his emotions. I think today probably got a glimpse of the man, but you also saw him concealing quite a lot of what he's probably feeling. For once, concealing everything he feels is an advantage. And it allowed him to do PMQs today with grace and dignity, decency, and actually quite a lot of humour, rather than score any points. And I think that says a lot about the man.
I mean, ultimately, how do you explain his demise? I mean, it is strange sitting here to think it's just been 2 years.
I don't think anybody around him, including me, thought this would have happened. He was intent on getting a decade of national renewal. And he did say quite frequently before the last general election that the first 2 years are going to be really tough. We're going to have to do a lot of things which people don't like, a lot of un-Labour things sometimes. And I think he is slightly baffled by why the Labour Party has so quickly gone into this sort of spiral of chaos and swiping right for a new Prime Minister, this sort of, almost a sort of algorithmic behaviour, sort of synthesising what's ever on social media, and there isn't a single reason why he's gone. You can talk about the inheritance. You can talk about, this unique troika of failing public services, failing public finances, failing public trust. You can talk about the bad luck of Trump. This premiership would have gone a lot better without Trump. The economic shocks, the security shocks. He wouldn't have had to appoint Peter Mandelson if it hadn't been for Trump.
But what about him? His responsibility?
Well, he's made mistakes. And he's made a lot of mistakes. I think prime ministers do make mistakes. I mean, I can't remember who said it, but most prime ministers make most of their mistakes in the first 2 years. Trouble is, we're in a cycle now of having prime ministers only last 2 years, and we never get to the point where we address the long-term problems facing the country as a result. And I do think there's a question about our democracy now. I think the last prime minister who came in on the back of a general election and then was removed because of a general election, actually held accountable by the people, was Ted Heath 50 years ago. And that is. I think I think we have to ask ourselves questions. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of listeners who are delighted that Keir Starmer's going. Lots of Labour MPs are delighted that Keir Starmer's going. But I do think we have to ask a question about how our democracy functions, where people are elected supposedly for a full term and then are ousted over and over again.
How much weight do you think should be given to the notion that has been debated at length that Keir Starmer just wasn't political enough to be an effective Prime Minister?
I think that's a valid criticism, and I think it's one of the reasons why he's ultimately gone. I think, in the end, it's Labour MPs deciding that they thought he wasn't a good enough politician to carry them into the next election and save their seats. That's the reason he's gone. It's not some sort of massive crisis or scandal. The mistakes he's made are relatively minor compared to, the Iraq War or calling a Brexit referendum or having parties during lockdown, right? They were correctable small mistakes, but there's an overall sense that intangible sense that he couldn't connect, that he wasn't good enough, that he wasn't political enough. I mean, one of the working titles I had for my biography of him was going to be The Unpolitician. And I eventually decided not to do that because it's not really a proper word, but you can see what I meant. And I meant it as a compliment because I thought, a lot of people thought that this sort of lack of taste for that transactional, posturing nonsense we sort of see in Westminster all the time, which people don't like, might actually be the antidote to it. That we could have this period of calm, grown-up, reasonable, decent government. One of the paradoxes about him is that because he didn't really have a taste for it, he subcontracted quite a lot of it to other people, and a lot of his premiership has been marked by precisely that kind of low politics, those briefing wars, those leaks, those sort of endless sort of who's up, who's down conversations which fascinate political journalists and no one else, rather than the big substantial things that he wanted to focus on.
Right, but I mean, there is a question, if you want to be sort of technocratic, not political in the way you've described, you've also got to be good at it.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think, we have to say the first 2 years were not a success. I mean, I don't think they were cataclysmic. It wasn't like, he crashed the economy or took us into an illegal war or broke some laws that he had imposed on everyone else. But, one of my favourite facts about politics is this, that the last 5 prime ministers are the 5 most unpopular prime ministers in polling history. According to some polls, each of them has broken the previous one's record for unpopularity.
But at some points, particularly Boris Johnson, for example, they were popular. Keir Starmer was never popular.
No, he started from a lower base, and that's part of the problem. But I think when you've got this sort of each prime minister in turn breaking the previous one's record for unpopularity suggests something else is going on beyond a kind of rational assessment of their virtues as a politician or as a prime minister.
What do you think he'll do next? Will he remain an MP?
I don't think beyond the next election, and maybe even not before. Maybe I break your confidence here, but I think he's said this to a number of people. He says he's been offered one job so far, which is to cut his father-in-law Bernard's hedge. He says he's not offering a minimum wage, but he might take it on the basis that if he does it well, he might be allowed to move up to Lawns. And that's the sort of self-deprecation he does actually very well in private. And we saw today some of that in PMQs, but we haven't seen it often enough.
Will he continue in public life?
I think he'd like to do some. You know, he's very dutiful and driven by service. That's why he came into politics. I think that's characterised his time as Prime Minister. He hasn't always sought popularity or been good at being popular. But I think he has some of the necessary qualities we actually do want in a Prime Minister. That resilience, that relentlessness, that ability to carry the weight. And the job really does weigh very heavily on people. And he carries that weight very, very well. And I always felt very reassured at a time of international crisis to hear that Keir Starmer was there in charge. And if it's now the verdict that he didn't have sufficient qualities to be Prime Minister, the necessary qualities he had are still necessary. And we might miss some of them.
NATO Secretary-General?
I think that's something that he would be interested in. I think it probably requires Andy Burnham's government to support him in that. And these are one of the some of the questions which Andy Burnham has to resolve quite quickly. You know, how far he is going to sort of contrast himself with the record of the last 2 years, or how much he wants to build on it. And I'm not sure what the answer is yet.
Interestingly, during Prime Minister's questions, his final PMQs, Keir Starmer said that he will, of course, give advice or support Andy Burnham if he's asked for it privately. Have they been in touch? I mean, are they talking?
A bit, yeah. Look, their relationship hasn't been good and hasn't been good for a number of years. They were quite close at one point, and they're not entirely dissimilar characters. You know, they're both like, you know, going to the pub, having a pint, and they both like football in a genuine way. They're both quite ordinary blokes in a way. Keir Starmer in some ways more ordinary, that he wasn't a politician or a special advisor for all his life. But Andy Burnham does that ordinary bloke thing very well, and, you know, he's had this reconnection with his roots through Manchester. But when Keir Starmer went to see him in 2020, asking for support in that last leadership election, Andy Burnham hesitated and said, well, he's got, you know, Rebecca Long-Bailey and Lisa Nandy standing there, MPs from the Manchester area, and and Keir, who's not used to asking people for things, he doesn't like asking people for things, came away quite angry at that. He thought Burnham was a friend, and their relationship has deteriorated since then. I think they've done something to rebuild over the last few weeks. They have met, and I think Keir has behaved with extraordinary dignity in showing how supportive he is, and I think Burnham will appreciate that.
Does he feel betrayed by Andy Burnham?
No, I think he does. I think he feels very let down by some of his cabinet colleagues, and there is, you know, people who he went out for and fought for quite a lot privately, and perhaps they didn't always know that. He does feel that, but more than anything else, you know, he's good at compartmentalising this stuff, and yes, there's reason to resent some people, or, you know, and that's not where his head is. His head is dignity, grace, national interest, do the right thing, and that's what we've seen over the last few weeks. I think it's what we'll see from him in the future. Right.
I mean, it is a ruthless game, as you know, but I suppose you could characterise it as the people you're mentioning in the cabinet. I don't know who he feels let down by, whether it's, you know, Ed Miliband, for example, who could be the next Chancellor, and whether or not he feels that Andy Burnham has taken his job.
I think he certainly feels that he did quite a lot to get Labour Party into a position where it could win the next election and win the next election. A lot of MPs, you know MPs, they all think they won the election on their own despite the leader, and I think, you know, he did win a big majority. He did change the Labour Party. He did warn everyone it was going to be tough for a couple of years, and I think that wobbliness from the PLP is a problem, because, you know, a big Labour majority should be a force for stability, and it's actually a force for instability. You know, the Labour Party voters, there was a poll in the New Statesman the other day saying that 48% of Labour voters wanted Keir to stay on, 38% wanted him to go. The figures for the PLP would be completely different. So Labour voters are actually more stable than these grown-ups they're electing to Parliament. I think that's a bit of a problem.
Tom Baldwin, thank you very much for talking to us about Keir Starmer on his final PMQs day. Well,